are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Welcome to Toward Anarchy. It is June 1st. I'm just jumping right into this thing because I only have a few seconds because I just packed the whole show. It was such a fantastic week, but it was a busy week. And between me and guests, we couldn't connect. And I thought, you know what? Let's do a best of show. I've never done a best of show, but I've had some amazing shows, some amazing conversations here in the last few weeks, over the last few months, coming from the end of last year into the literal middle of this year. TowardAnarchy.com to follow along as always, and at Toward Anarchy on Facebook, Instagram, X, wherever you see us. Give us the like. Stop right now. I'm not going anywhere. You can press pause or whatever, or you can roll it back later. There's so many ways that you can listen. If there was something you would miss, and you're not going to miss anything, just stop right now. Take that second. I know I forget to do it all the time. Give the like, give the share, the follow, the subscribe, whatever the terminology is, wherever you see us at. It's a best of show, but everything else is still the same. This will be fantastic with Larkin Rose, Danny Panzella, Luke Tatum, Craig Hargis, all these guys and more coming up over the next 2 hours. So enjoy that here on Toward Anarchy, and we'll be back with a regular show and regular new interview next week. Take care.
Fantastic. So, as I was saying, everybody, if you like what you hear, what we're about to chat about, you want to know more about Mike, you want to know more about his book, MikeAndersonsBooks.com, books plural. Man, politics, tribal nature, some interesting words in just sort of looking over your bio and your information and some of the things that you've done. It sounds like you've had a good look at this sort of thing, and you've kind of been able to point to some keys and hopefully maybe some ideas for people who are still involved in this system to better navigate through it all. And that kind of begs the question for someone like myself: how do you come to even write about something like politics, to really want to be so deeply involved in an understanding of this game that they have going on?
Well, it's been a journey. Let me take you through it quickly. I am an engineer by chemical engineer is my bachelor's degree, and I have a PhD in computer science. So I'm a data IT guy, basically, career IT guy. But I've always liked history. I've read history my entire life, been interested in history, political systems, and all that. 20 years ago, I started writing about history, and pretty quickly got into political systems because that's an important part of any society throughout history. And I actually started a blog on ancient history in 2008. So I was writing about the Greeks and Romans mainly. And when you do that, you obviously end up talking about their political systems, the Greek democracy, the Roman Republic. And I got thinking about the fact that people have, in 2,000 years, human beings have not changed. There is no DNA that works that fast. So those societies reflect the same forces and behaviors and all that we see today. And my blog has on the banner on the front, it says, "History is already today has already happened," referring to the fact that there really isn't anything new in terms of human behavior. Right. So, but there was a seminal event that happened to me. I read in 2012, a gentleman named Jonathan Haidt published a book called The Righteous Mind, which basically he's a social psychologist at NYU. And his book talked about the difference in behavior between the left and right. And I always had questions in my mind about why are people arguing so much about politics? Why are there such different point of views? And his book documented all that. And basically what he, as a psychologist, did was identified characteristics, we call it political morality, which is basically the behaviors and personality characteristics that people have that lead to their politics, because it's partly genetic. And so you can look at the left and right and see different behavior. And, when I start talking about it, it's probably going to be obvious to you because we all observe this. For example, the left is obsessed with equality. They would like to see a socialist political system because they hate capitalism and they believe that capitalism is unfair because it's Darwinian. There's winners and losers. They don't like that. They want to create a society where everybody is equal. So they, in Haidt's terms, there are actually 6 personality traits. Caring and fairness are 2 of them, and those are very important to the left. The other ones are loyalty, authority, and sanctity, and then liberty is kind of an offshoot of those. And the loyalty, authority, and sanctity are important to people on the right. The people on the right do not believe in equality because they don't believe that's the normal human behavior. That when you put humans in a group, the group becomes hierarchical because that's how humans behave and operate. Some people will become the leaders and some people will become the followers, and that's the way it is, and you can't make them equal. So loyalty and authority mean a lot to the right, and then sanctity is basically originally, back in the days of primitive man, sanctity was protection from disease. So there was some kind of like mushrooms that were poisonous, sanctity was protection of oneself, basically. And then over the time of human history, it became really part of religion. Right. So sanctity is really the veneration and respect for symbols or religious beliefs or whatever. So it's turned into something different. But, people on the right tend to be more religious than people on the left. So, hopefully in describing these, it makes sense to you and you can observe it in the public.
I think just about anybody who's paying any attention at all is going to agree with those. It seemed like pretty basic assumptions about, or observations, really, not even assumptions about, pretty observations about our political system as it has been from the beginning.
Sure, and those differences are not just the result of Jonathan Haidt's book. That's not the only evidence for this. They've done a lot of studies, for example, where they'll take groups of subjects, and they ask their political leaning, are you liberal or conservative? And then they take them through a questionnaire answering questions that kind of indicate which one you are, and it always matches. And so, for example, people on the left are more open. They like new things. For example, they like to travel. People on the right are more status quo oriented. They like traditions, and they believe in traditions and the veneration of traditions and all that. So those are basic differences. But to take it a step further, they've done MRI testing where you ask a person different questions about politics, and then you take an MRI. Or you're taking it while you're asking that. While
you're answering,
and which part of the brain lights up? Well, a different part lights up for people on the right than lights up for people on the left, because their brains are different. And so that's the part of the genetic aspect to it is when we're born, we have a tendency, and it's about 50% inherited tendency and 50% environment, like people always talk about. But you have a genetic influence on whether you're conservative or liberal, and it can change, but more people than not stick with their genetic propensity, and that's
probably even when they do change, they still tend to change with the understanding that they're still that same kind of person, but they've decided, they've realized, observed that the political system isn't about how you feel. It's about the reality of what these individuals are doing when you elect them.
Right. So back to the brains for a second. So the brains of the left that are actually more developed than the right is the part of the brain that has to do with complex decision making. The left likes analytics. They're analytical people, and they like making decisions. The right is more reacts by gut rather than being analytical. The part of the brain that is more advanced than the right's is called the amygdala. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's the part that controls flight or fight. There you go. Tendency. Area. Right. So, and that's because, conservatives are more, they gut react to threats, and it's that part of the brain that controls that. But it's also...
that's because I would venture to guess that's because there's an already decided morality on the part of the right individual, generally speaking, that suggests easy answers in what we would consider probably easy problems. They are a little more black and white, I guess would be the way to say it.
Right. So these brain differences actually go back long before Homo sapiens existed, because they developed when man left Africa and started to migrate into Europe and Asia. Obviously, he encountered new ecosystems which were different from Africa. I mean, if you take northern Africa and compare it to the Alps, for example, very different. So this set of behavioral traits that are liberal and conservative have to do with adaptation to the environment.
Makes sense.
So liberals are more, they like new things, they want to experiment, so their ability was more tuned toward finding food, where the conservatives, who are more status quo people, their ability was more attuned to managing the food supply that already existed. So if you're in an environment where you have unlimited food, you don't need to find any. You can just manage it. But if your food supply runs out and you need to find new food supply, then you need people who are adventurous and want to go help find food. And of course, it goes without saying that there's a whole ton of people in the middle. When I talk about these, right? When I talk about these characteristics, it's at the extremes that they're most prominent. And then there's people in the middle that they have a mix of these characteristics that don't lead them in a direction either toward liberalism or conservatism. So they're the independents. So the society has a variation in behaviors that were originally for adaptation, but now determined political attitudes.
It was something that stuck in my craw here this last week, and I just have to get it out really quick because I think it actually is a good introduction into the guest today and the conversation that we're going to ultimately have. And it's across the social media and around the world of weird out there. There's all this past week there was this weird question of whether or not somebody should shoot a dog, or whether somebody would shoot a dog or shoot a person over a dog. Sorry. To protect their dog, shoot some person, hurt some person, harm some person who was trying to take their dog, hurt their dog. And it just seems like such a silly question to me to ask if someone will use force to protect their property, to protect themselves, to protect the things and people that they love? It seems to me to be a backwards question, and the question is, it really should be, is it worth losing your life over trying to take what's mine, trying to harm me? That seems like the more realistic question. You shouldn't put me in that position where I have to make a decision whether it's my stuff, my dog, me over you, and any concern I might have for you as a human being. You shouldn't put me in that position. And that particular question, that thing it was all over the TikTok, it was all over the Reels this week. I just kept seeing it pop up, and nobody had that straightforward answer. There were people that, yeah, that's right, you're a real POS if you would shoot a person over a dog. You value a dog's life more than you value a person's life, or you value your property over a person's life. And again, that's just a backwards question. But my guest, he asked a question once, and it went viral. He's asked a lot of questions of the people, but this is one that this is the first question that I heard, the first time that I'd heard of the guest. When he asked the question, when should you shoot a cop? And of course, to me, the answer is really easy. It's a really easy question to answer. That answer is the same time you would shoot anyone else. The costume that the guy is wearing doesn't it doesn't change the crimes, the violations that he's enacting upon somebody. So it was a really simple answer for me, but it was a big to-do. And Larken Rose asked that question some years ago, and I came across it and found it, and I found out who Larken Rose was, and I wanted to have a conversation with him for some time. And finally, we've been able to get him on the show, and he has this fantastic new project that he's been involved in, has been working on for a while, and it's been fun to watch it come together, just sort of from the periphery, like I do everything. And the Jones Plantation film is completed. It's out there. It's the very thinly veiled allegory about our current political reality and the very nature of government itself. And I'm curious to hear about it. And so I went straight to the man himself and found Larken Rose to come on and tell us about the plantation. Larken Rose, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and I know you're doing the rounds right now. So it's really cool to get a chance to talk to you like this when I know there's going to be a passion in your voice and a fire in your belly like no other with this fantastic project called the Jones Plantation. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad it finally worked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've been let's see. I've been following you around for a little while on the social media and things, and I've reached out a time or two, and we just never connected, and so it's really great to do so now because you're a huge influence. There are a lot of we run in the same crowds, and I see your name pop up, and I see people talk about your book, and they just have such amazing things to say. Well, okay, most people have amazing things. They're always the haters, but so it's really great to get a chance to talk to you myself and hear from you directly about yourself. And if you will, just a minute to tell us, why you're an anarchist, how you got here, why we would ever be having a conversation about such an important and hopefully future cult hit film.
Okay, I'll try to give the short version here. I was raised sort of conservative, constitutionalist, kind of libertarian leaning, and I already like to debate, and I like to think about things, and I like to ponder philosophy and stuff like that. And I basically, with the help of my first wife, debated myself off the political spectrum entirely, and Tessa at the same time, because all I set out to do was whittle down my view of government to the perfect, legitimate government and what it should be. And along the line, trying to be consistent. And meanwhile, I'm surrounded by everybody who wants more government than I do. So there wasn't a whole lot of people who already wanted less than I did. But trying to whittle it down and saying, well, I don't get to force people to fund it, because that's not okay. You can't say, well, it's for your own good, so I'm going to extort you. Like, that's not legitimate. That's not moral. And I can't, like, prevent other people from getting their own protection or their own ways to help the poor, build roads or whatever. And so piece by piece, I whittled down the ideal of government until I realized the entire thing was gone. It wasn't government anymore. It was just people being people, and they can organize and cooperate in a million different ways voluntarily, as they should, but that isn't government. Like, government means a ruling class, authority over a certain people or place, and that necessarily implies coercion and domination. So I sort of I know a lot of people got there sort of debating what would work better, and to me it was completely different. It was, well, what's legitimate and moral? And at the end of the day, I realized ruling classes aren't. There's nothing you can do. Democracies aren't. Constitutional republics aren't. Like, kings aren't. Nothing gives anybody the right to rule, which means it can't ever be moral or legitimate. So I accidentally found myself realizing, oops, that kind of makes me an anarchist, because to oppose violent aggression is necessarily to oppose government entirely. So that's how I got there, and that was 27 years ago. So I've been doing this a while.
You've been at it for a couple of days. You've written a number of books. One of the books that people tend to talk about is the I guess it was your first book, and is this the case that you sort of wrote it while in jail? Is that
I assume you're talking about The Most Dangerous Superstition,
right?
Which it wasn't the first, but it's easily the most well-known. I started working on that in prison. I was mostly working on The Iron Web, which is a novel, and Kicking the Dragon, which was my story of my adventures with the federal extortion racket. But sort of the seeds of the idea of The Most Dangerous Superstition was already there. I knew I wanted to write it, but I knew I had to delay it long enough that I wouldn't, a year later, think, oh, I could have done that better. So I'm still proud of how it came out, and I think partly that was from intentionally dragging my feet and making sure it said things the way I think they needed to be said. And that's by far the thing I'm most well known for, is The Most Dangerous Superstition.
Yeah, right. And I hear good things about it, and I've cracked it. I've thumbed through it. I purposely I make it a point to not read about these things. I'm one of these people that I absolutely have. There's no question in my mind that you could. I could be out on a desert island somewhere with no concept of the sort of general things that we understand about governments or democracies or communisms or whatever pet name the favorite government ruling class happens to have at the time, and that I would still have the same understanding about reality. It's amazing what you've done is you've taken and you've removed the uniforms and the titles and the presentation and the pomp and circumstance of flashy government and authority, and said that underneath all of these names and descriptions and rules and laws is just simple control, people trying to manipulate other people for whatever their various reasons. And there's some historical, I guess this is what you find out when you start looking around, right? There must be some historical reason why this happens, or some historical evidence of this being a regular thing that happens. And then you start looking at, well, maybe it's not about history, maybe it's not about what these guys wrote down in this book, maybe it's about human nature, maybe there's no way that you can create a system like this, call it whatever you want, and pretend that it isn't violating other people, and that there isn't a class of people involved in this that absolutely know or don't give a damn that they are violating other people.
Yeah, and it's been a long, long time since anybody could dominate a huge number of people by just brute force. Mm-hmm. Thanks largely to the advent of the firearm. It makes it really hard to subjugate people who don't want to be subjugated. And so the art I mean, kind of an insult to call it that, the art of enslaving minds is many centuries old, and it's practiced around the world. And that's really the focus of the Jones Plantation. The movie is to show people the art of mental enslavement that has been used on them and why it is way worse and way more destructive and powerful than mere, like, physical, I'm going to chain you to this tree and make you work. Like, if somebody does that, everybody, the victim and everybody else recognizes, well, that's really, really bad. Like, whoever did that to you was a really bad person. And if that person goes, yeah, I'm not sure I can get away with this too long, what if I can convince them that he has a moral obligation to work for me, that there's some special arrangement, and I'm going to start, like, doing rituals and elections and constitutions and all sorts of fun stuff to make the people think that I have the right to do this. Instead of everybody hating me because I chained a guy to a tree, I'm going to make everybody love me and come to me and think I should be ruling them, and that they should be paying tribute to me. And so that's basically human history for the last however many thousand years in a nutshell. And the purpose of the Jones Plantation movie is to show people an allegory that just smacks them upside the head with what they have all been falling for, what's been used on them and what has been working on them. And it's designed to make people see through that. It's difficult for a lot of people, including myself, if I don't, like, intentionally not do this. It's difficult to separate the person you're talking from, the person you're talking to, from the garbage they've been taught. And the reason I'm actually really optimistic is having come to the realization that the vast majority of people are voluntarists inside already. They just have this pile of authoritarian garbage they were taught. But they didn't come up with it on their own. They didn't decide, you know what we need? We need to be violently dominated by a bunch of sociopaths. They had to be taught these things. They had to have it bashed through their skull day in and day out since before they could even talk, to learn the insanity of authoritarianism. And so things like the Jones Plantation or my book, or I made a course called Candles in the Dark, which is about teaching voluntarists how to talk to the rest of the world without them getting defensive and flipping out. But I think the key is to understand that almost everybody you talk to, even if they're advocates of authoritarian injustice, they're also victims of it. They're just repeating a lie that they were taught. They didn't come up with it on their own. They're doing what they think is right. Now, their view of right and wrong is totally warped by their statist indoctrination. And so getting them to see through the tricks so that they realize that what they really are and what they really believe in doesn't match the government garbage they were taught, and the legalese garbage they were taught, and the authoritarian garbage they were taught. The real them is on our side. And to me, one of the things that's most painful to watch, and the Jones Plantation movie shows this, I think, rather well in a couple scenes, is when you have well-intentioned, decent people making excuses for their abusers and even defending their abusers and attacking the only people who actually want them to be free. And it's just because they don't understand the game. They don't understand what's been done to them. They take pride in obedience to sociopaths. Well, I'm a law-abiding taxpayer. And they think that equals good person. No, that's not how that works. And so almost everything I do is trying to help people see through the game that has been played on them. Because if the well-intentioned people who've been falling for this for centuries and centuries stop falling for it, the tyrants have no power. Like, their victims outnumber them a gazillion to one, but we go along and most of us act as collaborators or even enforcers because those people fell for the game. And if they see through the trick, that's when the trick stops working on them. So Jones Plantation is all about showing people, here are the tricks that complete sociopaths will use to dominate and control you. And then once you recognize it, you have to figure out what to do about it.
Pat, Nick, I'm so I'm glad that you were able to do this, and I appreciate you taking the time, because I know that you this is a topic that you've been kicking around for a while, and has some sort of personal interest and attachment to you as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to come share what you know about it with me and the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here. You know, I got into this stuff. I was always into sci-fi and watching Discovery Channel as a kid, and, you know, seeing what kind of new and cool stuff we were going to come out with. I was also, you know, I was a dirt bike rider, so I love machines, and I was fascinated by, like, military technology. So fighter jets and drones and AI and all this kind of stuff. And for a long time, it was just this abstract thing that existed on the Discovery Channel or in sci-fi books or on TV. It wasn't actually real until I lost my hand in an accident and had to start looking into prosthetics. And it became very real very fast. And once I started looking into it, I was very disturbed by what I found. Like, first off, I was expecting to get some Luke Skywalker hand that was going to be just amazing. It was going to, you know, I wasn't going to be whole again, but it was going to be the next best thing to it, you know, and it was just going to get better over time. And that was so wrong. I mean, these prosthetics are, you know, they're built with 50-year-old technology. And this is a problem with a lot of this advanced medical technology is the government. The government stands in the way, regulations. It costs $2 billion right now to bring a new drug to FDA approval. $2 billion. That's incredible. So in the early 2000s, there was this guy. He was a veterinarian, and he was working with these things called ECMs, and he called it pixie dust. It was an extracellular matrix, and it was a piece of a pig's stomach. And these things had like stem cells in them, and they were just this really magical crap, hence the name pixie dust. So this guy was experimenting with it, and he's like, man, this stuff is like growing back muscle tissue like crazy, like nothing we've ever seen before. So a couple years go by. This is the early 2000s, I believe 2007, and a family member of his cuts his finger off in a RC plane accident. Go figure. And he goes and he sets up an appointment with a hand surgeon, same type of thing that I did. You know, I was in the burn unit, but this guy, he called up, and what do I do? And they're, okay, come in, find the tip. We'll, you know, see if we can do it. But essentially, we're just going to take a piece of skin off your leg and cover up the top. And so this guy goes, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to send you some of this dust and just stick your finger in it a couple times a day. And within a few months, the guy's finger grew back.
That's insane.
It's insane, right? So I didn't learn about this until after I had gotten out of the hospital and lost my hand. And I'm thinking, like, how in the hell was this stuff not in? I was in the University of Utah's burn unit. It's a teaching hospital. They have some of the best burn supplies in the world. I was getting, you know, stuff that the Air Force had, but it was like pieces of foam. It wasn't any, like, crazy thing that was going to grow my hand back. So I did a little bit of research into this, like, all right, when is this product going to, you know, make it to market to help someone like me? Go figure. This year, it took until this year for a product that they could use on second-degree burns made out of this material. 20 years and $2 billion.
Okay, right. Well, that's the point, right?
Back.
It's not just that it took time. It was the fact that the reason that it took time was because of the government influence and trying to get through the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is creating, you know, the same type of thing that the war on drugs is creating. The war on medicine is a similar, you know, we live in this weird reality where we're controlled by pharma, but we don't get anything good from it. You know, they want you to be perpetually sick. You know, these things that heal you, they don't like. Like, I take, you know, $200 worth of medication a month. They're not getting that if they're growing my hand back. So, technologically, this stuff is ready to go. They have it dialed. DARPA has been digging into people's brains since the early 2000s. They've been, you know, growing limbs. This is a psychological barrier that needs to be passed before they can push this technological barrier into society. And this is a top-down movement, and you can see it plainly in the trans movement. And this is something that, like, the postmodernists and the Marxists have been on forever. You can't, human nature needs to be changed. The way human nature is set up, the way we operate, we like markets, we like, voluntary interactions on free markets. The communists don't like that. So what do they need to do? They need to change the nature of man themselves. And this is the perfect opportunity for it. So the trans agenda is really just a transhuman agenda. It's designed to break down the family, break down the reality of the individual. You were talking earlier about you are an individual. You are capable of saying things that piss people off. And if you were afraid of doing that, you wouldn't have, ever opened your mouth. Well, this is how they get rid of that. They dig into your brain. They change the way you think. They change the way humans act. And they build their society from the top down. Total control.
It's no wonder that they've used this approach, because it's really kind of a simple idea. We all want to be a little bit better, and we all want to be better than human. I mean, and there's no reason why we can't strive to be better humans, but we're always going to be human. So it's really easy to pick, especially when you have this culture that we've created, particularly over the last 50 years or so in the sci-fi culture and the advanced, just the looking forward to the future that we've been doing, and the fantastic possibilities of transcending our human bodies, and there's any number of reasons why this would be maybe a good thing, because our bodies are very frail and very fragile, and there's a very vast expanse of universe out there that we have to populate, that we have to get into, but what's the point if we don't ever get there? If we get there and we're not human, if we're something less than we ever were, if we're some collective, that's a lot of the technology is geared towards that, bringing a collective thought. All this AI nonsense that we're dealing with, this silly stuff that they call AI, is not AI. It's not intelligence. It's not an individual. It's not able to think for itself. It's programmed. It's manipulated, and that's what all this transhumanism is. That's what all this transgender agenda is. It's a manipulation, just like you were saying, of our own human nature to try to ideally make us better than what we are, but and somehow limiting who we are.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like you were talking earlier, there's a bell curve to this. Like, I live my life in absolutes for the most part. Like, is it legal or is it illegal? Is it moral or is it immoral? Is this right or is this wrong? And this one just really throws me for a loop, because there's a lot of gray area going on here. Because, like you said, we live in a sick country. We live in a country where people are sick and injured. You turn on the TV and you hear nothing but pharmaceutical ads. And obviously there is a point to that where they're pushing these pharmaceuticals, but people wouldn't be buying them if they weren't sick and injured. You know what I mean? Like, we want to help people as much as we can, but at the same time, we have to be aware of what they're trying to do here. And the game is for a small portion of the population to live forever, while the rest of us kind of fight for the scraps.
I'm not opposed to it. I like beans. I mean, it's not that. I'm
they just don't belong in chili.
They just don't belong in chili. It's just that simple.
How's the show going, man? You're host of the Bad Roman podcast. It's exploded. You're huge. You're worldwide. Congratulations on that stuff, man. You know me, I'm hanging out there always just kind of watching from the rafters and in the background, and you do amazing where you talk to great people. You have such great conversations, and you're reaching a lot of people. I think it's a fantastic thing.
Well, this 2024, about March, will be 4 years that we've been doing it, and even 4 years later, Nobody's more surprised than I am about the success we've had. I don't get it because I don't consider myself some intellectual, or I've just got a few things to say, and some people want to listen, and the more people shared it, it's starting to resonate with a lot of Christians, I think, because they're starting to recognize something's wrong here. You got Christians entangled with the state, and then they're starting to recognize, okay, something's wrong. And if you could just go back to the basic teachings of Christ, you'll recognize very quickly that Christians should not be meddling with anything with politics. And any Christian, their political views should be anarchist. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, we talk about it all the time, Jesus being the original anarchist, and in the early church, the first 400 years, they followed suit. So as far as the show's going, man, we got some plans for 2024 to kind of see where it goes. I've brought on somebody else to help with some visual stuff for it. It's really kind of helped our Facebook pick up a little bit. Facebook had a shadow. I think they still have a shadow ban, but what she's been able to do with some videos and some of the artwork, we're taking quotes from the show, and she's making artwork with it, and that's awesome. It's really helping pick up social media. And as much as social media drives me crazy, it's necessary if you're going to do something like this.
Hey, it's funny. I was making fun of Instagram just as the show was coming on. I was, I'm just being silly. But I actually did notice that on your post. I was looking at the page and seeing the different art, and it just jumped right out at me. It was really cool, the different quotes and things like that, and just the flashiness and the colors and everything. It was just right there. I did notice it. So it is actually, you're absolutely right. That's really cool. I need to do that myself. It's something that I need to do. I need to, because I see it myself. When I do that, when I make that little extra effort to put out that bright, shiny appearance, it gets noticed. People notice it slowly but surely over time. It's fantastic. That's really cool, man. What's your biggest revelation in doing it? Other than people will listen.
Well, like I said, just picking up the traffic on Facebook has been interesting to me, because there for the longest time it seemed like we weren't getting any interaction. Like I said, they've had a shadow ban for a while now, and I don't know if that ever goes away. But however she's doing it, and the stuff she's making, she's able to break through the shadow ban somehow. And this stuff's getting shared, and more people. We're getting more people to come to follow the page as well on Facebook. And unfortunately, Facebook is our largest audience. Compared to Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever they call it now. Like, I don't really spend a whole lot of time on Twitter, but as far as Facebook, it's our largest audience right now. And Instagram's picked up a little bit, so we'll see. I just think it's cool, man, because you gotta, we've known this for a while, that people need to see something to grab their attention. I don't know what it is. Like, you need a video, or you need some kind of meme to get people's attention, and once they get their attention with that, they read it or they listen to the video, and then it sends them to the podcast. It sends them to our other social media sites, and so it's just, and word of mouth to me is huge too. Word of mouth is huge to me, because and the way they're sharing the stuff, sharing the show, it blows my mind how this works and how fast it works. That's probably my biggest revelation, how quick it has happened. She hasn't been on board. She hasn't been with the project for very long. And just in the past 2 or 3 months, it's however long she's been on, it's picked up tremendously. I told her that the other night. I said, what you're able to do with this stuff, she's got a marketing background as well. So what she's doing, it's breaking through some of the stuff from Facebook. Whatever Facebook's trying to do to us, whatever she's doing, it is breaking through that. And I think it's fantastic.
That is awesome. And there's a lot of people that will argue that the Facebook and the social media is, you got to leave Facebook, you got to leave Twitter, you got to get out of those places. No, that's where the battleground is. It doesn't make any sense. If that's where everybody else is, that's where we need to be too, even if it is not, I don't know, if it's not a perfect place. I don't imagine that walking down the streets in sandals in a sort of dusty desert, trying to preach the word to poor people, homeless people out on the street was a very comfortable experience, or that you necessarily wanted to be there to do that. But Just to bring that analogy of sort of Christ and anarchy back together. How is the audience responding to it? Are you attracting Christians that didn't know about anarchy? Are you attracting anarchists that didn't think there was a compatibility with Christianity when we're closet Christians? What's the sort of feedback that you get from people? Who is your audience?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because she messaged me last night while I was at work, and she said that she's got a friend who's an atheist, and she's like really against Christianity, but she's listened to some of our content, and she's kind of understanding where we're coming from. Like, she's hardcore atheist from what I understand, and the atheists are kind of really. If you've ever talked to an atheist, sometimes they're really, really militant about it, and
yeah.
And but somehow what we're talking about kind of resonates with her, so she gets it. Like, the Bad Roman is not your mainstream Christianity. We're going back to the roots. And so when you go back there and you show anarchy, but as far as Christians, I don't know. I think it's still too early to tell if they're latching on yet or not, or any new ones, I should say. Now, there are some that we've been doing it for almost 4 years that have, and there's still some that reject it. I mean, there's still some that think that they have to be involved with politics, and they use the Romans 13.
I was going to ask,
garbage that gets thrown in our face constantly. They're misreading that scripture.
Hey, explain that real quick.
Well, they're reading it without reading Romans 12, first of all, and in Romans 13, when Paul talks about governing authorities, they understood in that time that to mean demons. They didn't understand that to be the government, but we know that the government is backed by Satan and his demons just by reading Scripture. If you go to the temptation of Christ, Satan said, "All authority has been given to me over the kingdoms," and Jesus rejected it. He didn't dismiss what Satan was saying. He was saying, but he didn't want no part of it. And the early church followed suit. But they'll take Romans 13 without reading Acts 5, where Acts 5 said we're to obey God rather than man. Okay? They just take 7 verses and say, okay, we're to submit to governing authorities. Okay, what does submit mean? And then you read Acts 5 where it says obey God rather than man. And in the original Greek in Acts 5, it says it's necessary to obey God rather than man. Obey and submit is 2 different words in the original Greek. They're just not the same definition. And I've used this example time and again. My favorite example was Rosa Parks. She was a devout Christian. She submitted to governing authorities when they came to arrest her, but she did not obey that ridiculous law. And she was actually setting where she was told we're supposed to be setting, per their rules. But she said, I'm not moving. And they told her, well, we're going to have to call the cops. You may, but I'm not moving. And when the governing authorities showed up, she submitted. There was no violent altercation, but she did not obey that law. And that's one thing that Christians get wrong so many times when they read Romans 13 is that word submit. They think it means obedience. No, that means you don't fight back violently.
I got to say, I've heard a lot of people talk about the Romans 13 being misunderstood and misread, but that is definitely the best way I've heard anybody put it to date, because I've heard a lot of people address that issue, and frankly, yeah, I like that. I think that's obvious. I think I love words. I love pointing out the difference in words and the importance and why there are 2 different words and why they would have a importance in their meaning and why you should be certain of the meaning of those words. We got to run into a commercial. We're talking to Craig Hargis, the Bad Roman himself, about Christian anarchy. We'll be right back.
I'm not opposed to it. I like beans. I mean, it's not that.
Yeah.
I'm
they just don't belong in chili.
They just don't belong in chili. It's just that simple.
How's the show going, man? You're host of the Bad Roman podcast. It's exploded. You're huge. You're worldwide. Congratulations on that stuff, man. You know me. I'm hanging out there always, just kind of watching from the rafters and in the background. And you do amazing work. You talk to great people. You have such great conversations, and you're reaching a lot of people. I think it's a fantastic thing.
Well, this 2024, about March, will be 4 years that we've been doing it, and even 4 years later, Nobody's more surprised than I am about the success we've had. I don't get it because I don't consider myself some intellectual, or I've just got a few things to say, and some people want to listen, and the more people shared it, it's starting to resonate with a lot of Christians, I think, because they're starting to recognize something's wrong here. You got Christians entangled with the state, and then they're starting to recognize, okay, something's wrong. And if you could just go back to the basic teachings of Christ, you'll recognize very quickly that Christians should not be meddling with anything with politics. And any Christian, their political views should be anarchist. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, we talk about it all the time, Jesus being the original anarchist, and in the early church, the first 400 years, they followed suit. So as far as the show's going, man, we got some plans for 2024 to kind of see where it goes. I've brought on somebody else to help with some visual stuff for it. It's really kind of helped our Facebook pick up a little bit. Facebook had a shadow. I think they still have a shadow ban, but what she's been able to do with some videos and some of the artwork, we're taking quotes from the show, and she's making artwork with it, and that's awesome. It's really helping pick up social media. And as much as social media drives me crazy, it's necessary if you're going to do something like this.
Hey, it's funny. I was making fun of Instagram just as the show was coming on. I was, I'm just being silly. But I actually did notice that on your post. I was looking at the page and seeing the different art, and it just jumped right out at me. It was really cool, the different quotes and things like that, and just the flashiness and the colors and everything. It was just right there. I did notice it. So it is actually you're absolutely right. That's really cool. I need to do that myself. It's something that I need to do. I need to, because I see it myself. When I do that, when I make that little extra effort to put out that bright, shiny appearance, it gets noticed. People notice it slowly but surely over time. It's fantastic. It's really cool, man. What's your biggest revelation in doing it? Other than people will listen.
Well, like I said, just picking up the traffic on Facebook has been interesting to me, because there for the longest time it seemed like we weren't getting any interaction. Like I said, they've had a shadow ban for a while now, and I don't know if that ever goes away. But however she's doing it, and the stuff she's making, she's able to break through the shadow ban somehow. And this stuff's getting shared, and more people. We're getting more people to come to follow the page as well on Facebook. And unfortunately, Facebook is our largest audience, compared to Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever they call it now. Like, I don't really spend a whole lot of time on Twitter, but as far as Facebook, it's our largest audience right now. And Instagram's picked up a little bit, so we'll see. I just think it's cool, man, because you gotta, we've known this for a while, that people need to see something to grab their attention. I don't know what it is. Like, you need a video, or you need some kind of meme to get people's attention. And once they get their attention with that, they read it or they listen to the video, and then it sends them to the podcast. It sends them to our other social media sites, and so it's just, and word of mouth to me is huge too. Word of mouth is huge to me, because and the way they're sharing the stuff, sharing the show, it blows my mind how this works and how fast it works. That's probably my biggest revelation, how quickly this happened. She hasn't been on board. She shouldn't have been with the project for very long. And just in the past 2 or 3 months, it's however long she's been on, it's picked up tremendously. I told her that the other night. I said, what you're able to do with this stuff, she's got a marketing background as well. So what she's doing, it's breaking through some of the stuff from Facebook. Whatever Facebook's trying to do to us, whatever she's doing, it is breaking through that. And I think it's fantastic.
That is awesome. And there's a lot of people that will argue that the Facebook and the social media is, you got to leave Facebook, you got to leave Twitter, you got to get out of those places. No, that's where the battleground is. It doesn't make any sense. If that's where everybody else is, that's where we need to be too, even if it is not, I don't know, if it's not a perfect place. I don't imagine that walking down the streets in sandals and sort of dusty desert trying to preach the word to poor people, homeless people out on the street was a very comfortable experience, or that you necessarily wanted to be there to do that. But just to bring that analogy of sort of Christ and anarchy back together. How is the audience responding to it? Are you attracting Christians that didn't know about anarchy? Are you attracting anarchists that didn't think there was a compatibility with Christianity when we're closet Christians? What's the sort of feedback that you get from people? Who is your audience?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because she messaged me last night while I was at work, and she said that she's got a friend who's an atheist, and she's like really against Christianity. But she's listened to some of our content, and she's kind of understanding where we're coming from. Like, she's hardcore atheist from what I understand. Mm-hmm. And the atheists are kind of really, if you've ever talked to an atheist, sometimes they're really, really militant about it, and
yeah.
And, but somehow what we're talking about kind of resonates with her. So she gets it. Like, the Bad Roman is not your mainstream Christianity. We're going back to the roots. And so when you go back there and you show anarchy, but as far as Christians, I don't know. I think it's still too early to tell if they're latching on yet or not, or any new ones, I should say. Now, there are some that we've been doing it for almost 4 years that have, and there's still some that reject it. I mean, there's still some that think that they have to be involved with politics, and they use the Romans 13.
I was going to ask,
garbage that gets thrown in our face constantly. They're misreading that scripture.
Hey, explain that real quick.
Well, they're reading it without reading Romans 12, first of all, and in Romans 13, when Paul talks about governing authorities, they understood in that time that to mean demons. They didn't understand that to be the government, but we know that the government is backed by Satan and his demons just by reading Scripture. If you go to the temptation of Christ, Satan said, all authority has been given to me over the kingdoms, and Jesus rejected it. He didn't dismiss what Satan was saying, but he didn't want no part of it. And the early church followed suit. But they'll take Romans 13 without reading Acts 5, where Acts 5 said we're to obey God rather than man. Okay? They just take 7 verses and say, okay, we're to submit to governing authorities. Okay, what does submit mean? And then you read Acts 5 where it says obey God rather than man. And in the original Greek in Acts 5, it says it's necessary to obey God rather than man. Obey and submit is 2 different words in the original Greek. They're just not the same definition. And I've used this example time and again. My favorite example was Rosa Parks. She was a devout Christian. She submitted to governing authorities when they came to arrest her, but she did not obey that ridiculous law. And she was actually setting where she was told we're supposed to be setting, per their rules. But she said, I'm not moving. And they told her, well, we're going to have to call the cops. You may, but I'm not moving. And when the governing authorities showed up, she submitted. There was no violent altercation, but she did not obey that law. And that's one thing that Christians get wrong so many times when they read Romans 13 is that word submit. They think it means obedience. No, that means you don't fight back violently.
I got to say, I've heard a lot of people talk about the Romans 13 being misunderstood and misread, but that is definitely the best way I've heard anybody put it to date. Because I've heard a lot of people address that issue, and frankly, yeah, I like it. I think that's obvious. I think I love words. I love pointing out the difference in words and the importance and why there are 2 different words and why they would have a importance in their meaning and why you should be certain of the meaning of those words. We've got to run into a commercial. We're talking to Craig Hargis, the Bad Roman himself, about Christian anarchy.
We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
TowardAnarchy.com. You can follow along. That's always the easiest thing to do. I try each week to put the information for the guests and some quotes and some links and just a bit of information that you can use at your leisure up there. So if you look for October 8th when you get there, if you're with me in real time, it should be right there on the front page. Just click October 8th. Otherwise, click the episodes button and look for October 8th there, and you will see Dave Krieger. He is my guest today. We're going to talk about his books, Clouded Titles, and maybe the Credit Restoration Primer, now in its fifth print since 1995. Just amazing. A longtime broadcaster and journalist and the current host of the Power Hour. Dave is going to join me here in just a minute. We'll talk about the state of the world, this collapsing economy. We'll talk about his book, Clouded Titles. And if you want to know more, if you like what you hear, you like Dave, you want to know more about what he has going on, those links are up there as well. There's a link to thepowerhour.com where he's the host every morning from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on weekdays. And then you can pick up the latest edition of Dave's book, Clouded Titles, at cloudedtitles.com. And then you can follow along the Power Hour on Facebook and Twitter at Power Hour Nation. And all that stuff is up there at towardanarchy.com. Look for October 8th, and there's a couple other links and some things that I share as well, always. So that is your starting point for everything. And I just want to jump right in and get Dave in here and talk with Dave, because I'm really excited, for one, hopefully no offense, to talk to an old journalist like myself, somebody I believe not everybody in our business does this or gets to do this, but I'm one of those people that I've been doing this long enough that when I say I cut a commercial, I mean I literally cut a commercial with tape. You know what I'm talking about, Dave?
I sure do. Yeah, I sure do know what you're talking about. I mean, we were back in the days of where you cut and splice, so they didn't have the electronic editing they do now. You literally had to roll the tape back and forward over the record head and the playback head, and there's a break, and we'll cut that sucker up there. We'll just edit a breath out of a stock market report.
Oh, man, and we didn't have canned things. You weren't just able to say, oh, let's see, I need a campfire for a sound effect. No CDs around?
Nope,
piece of
didn't
paper?
have it.
No,
we had CDs in 1983 when I was doing major market mornings in Kansas City, but but
we didn't necessarily have a library of sounds built up yet. And I just remember taking a piece of paper and crumbling it up in front of the microphone, just slowly crackle, and then put that in the background there. And that was a trick that I learned from my favorite educator when I was in college. And he said, oh, yeah, we're trying to find some sound effects, and we do this and this and this. And I was like, man, that is fantastic. I am in on this. So, Dave, it's really great to talk to you. Like I was saying, old school journalist like myself, and just still really about delivering an amazing positive message and just getting the truth out to people after all these years. And that's tough to do in this environment. Yeah, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. In fact, I literally, on the Power Hour, my whole MO is to make fun of everything because, one, it takes the negativity out, or the sting out of the actual report that I'm doing. And I actually challenge what is out there, because a lot of this mainstream media, when you find stuff on like The Guardian or RedState.com, you're looking at you were journalists. We've both been around long enough to know you've got the ultra-right news organizations, the ultra-left news organizations, and we're trying to fit this whole picture somewhere together in the middle and make sense of it all. At least, the truthful part of it. And the thing is that with AI and everything entering the picture right now, I've told my listeners, I said, at some point in time in the future, you are not going to know what to believe in. You aren't going to have the details, and you're going to have AI creating news. AI will literally, it could create a nuclear war. They could put out false information and false flags that would, this thing that's going on in Israel right now with Hamas, between the IDF and Hamas is just, we are that close right now because from what we are hearing, and of course this is back channel stuff that we haven't vetted yet, that there's information that some of these weapons that were sent to Ukraine all of a sudden ended up in the Hamas's hands. And I'm like, no, this could happen.
I just heard about that this morning, too, as I was glancing through the news and everything, and I saw that come up, and they were pointing out the types of weapons, and it's no coincidence that they sort of match. We'll have to see how that plays out as the information on that comes out. So, you've heard that. Oh, man.
Yeah, we have. We've been plugging it. I mean, just because my show runs Monday through Friday from 7 to 9 Central does not mean that we stop. You and I both are on the same page here, Michael. Both of us are news junkies, and we both pay attention to what's going on 24/7. I mean, whenever we have a waking minute, actually, I should rephrase that. We do need our sleep.
True. Try to get a little bit of sleep in there and a little bit of family time, and then there's the business to run. But there's still a computer always sitting there. There's always a phone. There's always some program or something going on in the background, some noise or something, constantly being fed information. And man, I can't even imagine being in a position where I'm not able to critically consider the information that I'm receiving because it is coming from everywhere. You can't even help but be surrounded by it.
Well, there's this thing, too, with censorship that's going on, too, because then you see some of this stuff gets filtered into you, and if you don't trust particular news sources. I've even had particular news sources that I refer to that have sometimes really disappointed me. I love it when they report something the White House announced this morning. I go, gee, I didn't know White Houses could talk. Who in the White House said that? It's like the guy that got on there, that guy out of Orlando, Florida, that was pushing his transformation into the light seminar. And he's going, well, I've been asked to report this thing about what's going to happen on October 4th. And I'm like, who told you to say that? Why are you scaring people half to death, making them think that this EBS test that us old-time broadcasters knew was exactly that, an EBS test? It's a warning. My phone didn't go off. I don't know if yours did, but I consider their test only a partial success. But I didn't hear any high-pitched tones, and I didn't see any zombie land. I didn't put treadmills out in front of my house and tie people's shoelaces together in case they turned into zombies that couldn't move. I mean, I didn't do stuff like that, but we were, the kind of mindset that this media is all about. I mean, I'm glad we're out there because they literally are trying to create mayhem. And I guess that's kind of parallels the title of your show.
Yeah, a little bit. I love the fact that I'm able to use that, the wording of the show, the name of the show, as a tool to open a conversation. Well, let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about words. Let's talk about the manipulation that's presented over language, politically and socially, to reach a particular perceived notion of the way things should be. So the word anarchy is just one of those simple little perfect examples of that, how the word can be used and misunderstood or misused and understood in different places at different times and depending on who you're talking to. So it's a great talking point. It's a great entry point. That and Pokemon. Those are great entry points with most of the people in the world today.
It's craziness, Michael. I'll tell you, the thing is if you ask me anarchy, give me a common day definition of what you think anarchy is. Sure. The summer of 2020 riots times 10.
Okay, yep.
That would be as close as I can get to where where this title jumps off the page of me, because, I mean, if you can imagine coming soon to a city near you, and especially if it's a blue state city, and I'm going to use that term because there's a bunch of them in Texas, there's a bunch of them in California. There's a bunch of them in Minnesota. We already found that out. New York is just booming with them. New Jersey, same way. And I mean, you look at cities like this, Philadelphia, and you take all of these illegal immigrants, 8 million of them that are coming in here, and a lot of them are fighting age men. They're being put up in camps that we're not aware of. There is one called the Colony that's going up in Texas, in East Texas, out in the woods out there. You've got places in New York where now they're putting people up in hotels. illegal immigrants are defecating on the street. They're beating up our citizens. They're raping women. They're murdering people. And this is just going to just increase. Crime is on the rise. They want to regulate our guns. People are going, I don't think so. I mean, if you're not this close to a revolution, if all of a sudden they decided to attack our grid and take out our grid, and I'm talking about all these Chinese nationals that have come into the country that probably have a skill set very similar to let's get on and see if we can hack into the grid and shut it down.
Right.
All you have to do is shut that grid down for a couple of weeks, and you watch all the blue state cities implode that quick. Because it'll happen, and we know it's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't even think it would
crypto.
take a couple weeks.
No, that's just a cyber attack. Well, no, after 72 hours and people realize that the power is off, I mean, that's when it really starts, the proverbial caca starts to hit the fan.
Yeah,
so
right.
I just kind of look at this and go, okay, it's no wonder, and I'm constantly asking my audience and getting comments from people about why they're buying guns and ammunition and stocking up on food.
Right.
I mean, where'd the mindset come from? It's the same tit-for-tat mindset that we're getting spoon-fed, like pablum, by our mainstream media that's scaring half of our population to hate the other half. I mean, you brought that up in your intro, with the sounders and everything else that were going on as you open the show. I mean, this is what we're being programmed to do, is to hate each other. I went to a farmer's market yesterday. Boy, you would not believe the mindset out there. I mean, most of the people are open, friendly, want to talk. Nobody's wearing a mask. Nobody got jabbed. They're all having conversations about what's going on, about truth, what's going on, truth. That's the kind of, talk about stimulating. I mean, I'm glad I went, because there are people in the hinterland, especially in the Midwest, that are paying attention to what's going on. I mean, I think there's a lot more Americans that are awake than mainstream media wants to give them credit for.
Have our conversation here with Danny Panzella. Velez, thank you so much for joining me, man. It's really good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be back. I was thinking as I was getting prepared for the show that I've been on your show a handful of times over the years. And Mike, I feel like you are one of the few, really consistent anarchists. There's a handful of us left in this movement that are consistent anarchists, like Larkin Rose is another one. So I always really appreciate having conversations with you, because I know, we're on the same page when it comes to all that. So I really. Oh
man, no, that's true. I appreciate you saying that about me. And the fact is that it's hard to find people to respect in the circles that we run in, because if you are around them long enough, you find that a lot of them aren't as principled as they say they are. And I think it's innate in me, and I think you're another one who it's innate in you. Your journey, we'll have to talk about that, just your psychedelic journey, but your journey in general, to come to be a truth speaker, to even find that you would want to get into investigating psychedelics, let alone testing your relationship with them. So tell the audience about you and Vanessa, your psychedelic relationship, your journey through healing. It's a great story.
Thank you. Yeah. So for those who don't know, when I first got into the truth movement in 2009-ish, around there, I was pretty conservative prior to that. I was a George Bush man. I voted for W, and I thought, great president. And then 2008, the financial crisis happened, and George Bush got on television and said, we have to suspend capitalism to save it. And I said, what did he just say? What? At the same time, my mom was battling cancer. And so I start doing research into holistic medicine for her. And I'm starting to research the financial system. And who do I run into in both of those arenas, in the health freedom and financial, education, but Ron Paul. So that's how I get started on the libertarian path. Well, then I wake up to 9/11. I see a bunch of the Alex Jones documentaries, and I'm like, oh my God, this just blows my world wide open. So I become an activist. A couple of years later, I meet my now wife, Vanessa, and we're at a party, and I'm handing out Loose Change DVDs. Now picture this. This was 2009. I'm dressed as Captain America. It's Halloween. It's a Halloween party. And I've got copies. I had the DVD burner, and I burned all these copies of Loose Change, and I bring them to this Halloween party, and I'm handing them out. So here's Captain America saying, did you know 9/11 was an inside job, and handing out loose change DVDs. And Vanessa was the first person ever to say, yeah, I know 9/11's an inside job. Doesn't everybody know that? That was the first time anyone had ever responded to me like that. And to this day, we say, you had me at 9/11 was an inside job.
Beautiful.
I mean, it was like love at first sight. So, but it wasn't, all just like a romantic comedy. I still had a lot of addictions. I was an alcoholic. I was a functional alcoholic, but I was an alcoholic. I had a lot of anger issues, about waking up and being like, oh my God, I've been lied to my whole life. And my activism, it was great. Like I jumped right into it and trying to educate people, but I was so angry. I was angry about being lied to by the government. I was angry about all the rights being taken away. I had so much of this anger. And, I had also been married before, so I had unhealthy relationship patterns that had come from my first marriage, which was to my high school sweetheart. So it was like she was really the only woman I was ever with. So Vanessa and I started our relationship, and we really did everything you could possibly do wrong. By the way, I was also a sex addict. So I would come to find out later through using psychedelics that I had what's called in Jungian psychology a mother wound. Essentially, just kind of this classic trauma that a lot of times young boys pick up, that they feel like their mother doesn't love them. And, now I understand that my parents were going through a divorce. I was a teenage boy, so already like trying to rebel against my mom. And just some things that she was doing to try to cope with the divorce from my dad. Now, being a divorced adult, I understand, especially with kids of my own. I get it. She needed time with her friends. She needed time away from the drama of the divorce and things like that. So, I was interpreting her going out a lot as her not loving me, as her not wanting to have kids. Like, she thinks we're an annoyance. Anyway, I didn't know this at the time. I became a sex addict. And basically, essentially what I was doing was looking for my mother's love, especially after she passed away, through having sex, as many women as I could get, right? And I was really an addict, because as soon as the afterglow of the orgasm was over, I was looking for my next fix. I felt so unworthy. Yeah, it was pretty intense. So now I get into this relationship with Vanessa, and all of this stuff is coming out. And Vanessa also was a functional alcoholic and severely depressed. So I was cheating on her constantly. We were fighting. I spent nights in jail because of our fights. The neighbors would call the police. Not that anything ever got physical, thank God. But, certainly there were times that glass was flying across the room, and we were making a lot of noise, screaming at each other in the middle of the night. So we got to the point, we hit rock bottom, and we got to the point that we were like, we either have to do something to heal, or we're going to have to go our separate ways. And we had already tried couples counseling. We were both in individual therapy. We had read every book you could find on relationships. We were listening to podcasts. We tried literally everything. And then a good friend of ours suggested we try psychedelics. And my God, did that just blow open our whole world. Because of my deep insecurities. Now, if you can imagine being a person who thinks that their own mother doesn't love them. I'm rewatching The Sopranos right now. It's the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos. And I'm rewatching. And a lot of the first couple of seasons of the show is about Tony and his relationship with his mother, where she doesn't believe. And I'm like, holy cow. Yeah, I experienced so much of this. The pain and the insecurity and the feeling of unworthiness. Like, how unworthy do I have to be that my own mother doesn't love me? So MDMA, specifically psilocybin and ayahuasca, were the three psychedelics that really helped me come to understand that, number one, my mother did love me, that I was misinterpreting things that my 12-year-old brain just could not understand. I did not have the maturity to really integrate what my mother was going through as a result of the divorce. And so I was able to realize that. And through the use of ayahuasca cured my alcohol addiction in one shot, one treatment of ayahuasca. And that was it. I hadn't touched a drink for years after that. I'm actually now back to the point where I actually can drink on occasion socially, and it doesn't cause a problem because I've healed that inner trauma of believing that my mother didn't love me. I'm no longer using the alcohol to numb that pain. The pain is gone. That's healed. So now I can enjoy a drink, and it doesn't activate any. And I think this is really the problem with regular therapy.
Sure.
And even Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I'm not saying that the steps don't work. I think the steps do work. I think the problem is that a lot of that trauma doesn't ever get dealt with that lays underneath.
Oh, yeah.
You can do the steps to control the habits.
Yeah.
But you really have to go deep. And an interesting thing is that the founder of AA used LSD. He was a proponent of psychedelic use. My wife and I, we call them date nights, and we will either do mushrooms together or MDMA together. Let me tell you, MDMA is such a beautiful medicine for connecting with your partner, especially. It's really a beautiful medicine in general. But to be able to, during the beginning of our healing process, because I had been cheating so much and I had a lot of secrets and I had told a lot of lies. And when you're trying to repair your relationship, having those lies, even if your partner has no idea that there's even a potential that you're lying, you know that you're lying, and you're carrying around all that weight. And it makes it very difficult for you to be vulnerable with your partner. And vulnerability is really the backbone of intimacy. So you can only be as intimate with your partner as vulnerable as you're willing to be. So I was carrying around all these secrets. But what I found was that on MDMA, what it does is it kind of turns down the reptilian brain, the part of your brain that is constantly looking for threats, right? That it's going to decide whether you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the defense mechanisms. It kind of turns down the volume on that part of your brain. So you're no longer in fear. So I could be rolling on MDMA and no longer have the fear that, if I confess this lie, she's going to leave me, she's going to judge me, she's going to think I'm unworthy. And it really creates this feeling of safety. So we were able to clear so much of what we like to call it is like stains on the glass. You have smudges on the glass. So if you think about it in a relationship, you kind of see each other through the lens of whatever your traumas are, or whatever it is that is between you. So like wiping the smudges off the glass, then you can see each other more clearly. So for instance, for me, when I was cheating, every time I did that, it created another smudge, right? And now I'm carrying the guilt of that, and it hinders me from being intimate with her. So now we can be on MDMA, and I can just let go of all this stuff and confess it and explain, I was feeling this way and whatever, and just express it all, let it out, and release it. And now it's gone. Because she's also rolling, she can be in a state of forgiveness and compassion. And it's not like, with MDMA, you're not really high. For those of you who don't have experience with it, it's not kind of like where you don't know what's going on, right? It's like you're fully aware of what's happening. You just don't have the fear driving you. So now you can be more relaxed and just be in compassion. So she could choose to forgive me or not. It wasn't like the MDMA is going to force her to forgive me of something if she doesn't want to, right? We're just talking through all of these problems that we had. And it's really just like helping bridge that gap of not having that fear, right? Where then we're going to try and defend ourselves from each other, right? How can you have intimacy if you're both on guard trying to defend yourself from your lover, right? It doesn't work. So
no.
That was so beautiful in helping us rebuild our intimacy. And that was really the first psychedelic that we started working with. And then that's when we moved into psilocybin and started working more with mushrooms. And what the mushrooms did was really help us go into our subconscious. This was more like personal work. It wasn't so much together, but us going into our own subconscious, finding out where the traumas are and what they're connected to. So it was through psilocybin that I even realized that I was an addict. I didn't know that I was a sex addict. I had no idea. I thought, I'm just a horny guy. I just have a high sex drive. That's the way I justified it. I even tried to kind of spiritualize it and said, well, maybe I'm polyamorous. Maybe I'm just not meant for monogamy. And, again, we went into that and it caused so many problems in our relationship. But then through the psilocybin, I was able to start connecting the dots, right? Seeing how my relationship with my mother was related to how I was treating women. And once we started to clear those blocks, our relationship just started getting better every single day. And now it's like magic every day. And I don't want to pretend that we don't have conflicts, that we don't argue. We absolutely do, but now we have the tools to be able to resolve those conflicts so quickly. So now an argument that may have lasted for a week 7 or 8 years ago, now it lasts for, 20, 30 minutes before we're able to work through it. And, and even sometimes we get mad, we walk away from each other, we cool off for a little while, and then we come back and it's like, I'm sorry I lost my temper. This is what I was really feeling that I was trying to cover up with the anger, et cetera, et cetera. So we spent years working with psychedelics, learning which psychedelics were good for what, for which type of issues. We've done so much research about how they affect our body somatically. I think that's another thing that the reason why traditional therapy, you could go to therapy for 10 years and not work through the issue, because if anybody who is familiar with Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, or The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, these are two really great researchers to look into. The Body Keeps the Score is Bessel van der Kolk, and then Joe Dispenza wrote Becoming Supernatural, and he talks a lot also about how to clear trauma from your body, because we're actually storing trauma in our myofascial tissue. So just being in your headspace and talking through your trauma is not enough. And so that's how psychedelics help also. A lot of psychedelics cause like what I like to call a flash reset to your endocrine system and to a lot of your nervous system and to a lot of your systems. So it kind of helps you shake out. If you've ever seen a dog or a deer, this is a famous, kind of an example that's used a lot. When a lion's chasing a deer, eventually the deer, if the deer gets away, you'll see like in the nature documentaries, they shake out. Or if you see your dog, if your dog gets into a fight with one of the other neighborhood dogs and then they shake it up, they're literally shaking off all the cortisol and the hormones that are dumped when you go into fight mode, right? So if you get into a fight with your partner, you have a cortisol dump like that as well. And your body doesn't know the difference between getting into a fight with your wife and being chased by a tiger. To your body, it's the same. It's all the same hormones are dumped. And so, but as humans, we don't do that. We don't shake out all the trauma after we've had the experience. And that's where somatics comes in. So psychedelics really also help with you releasing these traumas somatically so they're fully flushed from your system. Because then if you don't flush them from your physical body as well, when you rethink of that fight you had with your wife, again, your brain will cause all those hormones to dump again into your body, cortisol and all those things. Your body thinks that you're in the fight with your wife again. So that's how you kind of re-traumatize, and that's why you never really can fully heal from those things just through talk therapy. That you also need to implement somatics. And, like exercise and yoga and things like that also help to clear that type of stuff.
I imagine, Michael, how that you've had your days where you wonder if you should just keep going or not. It can be hard to put value on the creative work, writing, and philosophizing and beautiful works of art and these things. And you're somebody who has been successful at it. And it's always a pleasure to just talk with you as a person, but also as a person who's successful in doing the things that I think a lot of people aspire to, saying their piece and doing the hard work to put it out there.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. What an intro. This is one of those shows I always love doing because you almost forget you're being interviewed. You're talking to a friend. But
I love it.
Yeah. This is definitely one of the shows whenever I'm asked, I pretty much drop what I'm doing. I quit doing interviews a couple of years ago, not for any reason other than I just had a lot going on in my life. And, there's one or two shows, this being one of the two shows, that whenever I'm asked, I drop what I'm doing. And always a pleasure to come on. But back to what you were saying, I heard your intro. I don't know, I guess I was muted or whatever. But, yeah, there are days when you definitely want to give up. And you don't really feel like your message is being heard. And right now I'm battling that because I've got another book that I need to get out. And I even have a really big name person who's going to write the forward for it, and he's really ramped up about it. But you get those days that you were just talking about where you just don't want to go on because you don't feel like you're making progress.
It's just such a huge mountain to climb, right? To really make a visible thing. Okay, I liken what we try to do in sort of getting the truth out there to the same thing that happens to me at the comic book shop. Go figure. So we have 60,000 bulk issues on the floor, comic books that we sell for $1 to $2 a piece, and that's a lot of comic books. It takes up a huge amount of space. But the thing is to get people to keep coming back and wanting to learn more, wanting to buy more books, wanting to dive in. They have to know that new stuff is out there, that there's something new for them the next time that they go to dig through the boxes. And when you take a couple hundred books, maybe 1,000 books a week, and drop that into 60,000 books, it's like dropping an eyedropper of water into a swimming pool. It doesn't necessarily have a giant effect.
Exactly. That's one of the problems that I'm having right now. Whenever I sit down to write these books, I don't want to write a New World Order book because they're a dime a dozen, and they're really not that good, to be honest with you. I mean, there's some good ones out there. I'm not knocking, there really are. But what I want to do is I want to write a book that separates myself, that isn't a book that is a rewording of another book that you read, or, that has new information. So whenever I approach the deep state, one of the things I wanted to ask myself is, what do people think the deep state is? And what is the deep state really? And a lot of people get the shadow government and the deep state confused. They refer to them as one and the same, and it's not. There really is a separation between the shadow government and the deep state. The shadow government is, at your table, so to speak, running the world from that table, that shadowy, smoke-filled room that we all imagine these bastards planning our future at. That's your shadow government. Your deep state is just your everyday American who works for your FBI, CIA, or, goes to work and perpetuates the shadow government's initiative, so to speak. So anyway, long story short, I wanted to break down the two and show that the shadow government uses the deep state to make progress in their New World Order agenda, global agenda, however you want to word it. So that was one of the challenges I had, is I didn't want to release a deep state book that was another release of another deep state book. So what could separate myself? So like when you get to the chapter like deception in politics, I talk about how they use politics as the deception. It's like the Antifa thing, or even the QAnon. That was all deceptive. That was what it was. So there's elements of new stuff to tell the story of the deep state in that book. But really, what separates that book, I think, is I have chapters about individualism versus collectivism, republic versus democracy. But what I really like about that book is I break down the difference between the shadow government and the deep state. Right. And that title, I really love the title in it, United Deep State of America, a Shadow Government's Republic, because it really shows that the possession of the deep state belongs to the shadow government there.
Right. Yeah, well, okay, so, yeah, that is something that you said there, whatever you want to call it. That's part of the problem, right, is sort of nailing down the differences. And I think that is something that is extremely important because it speaks to what we can do as individuals in terms of directing our energy towards ideas and things that they hold captive, and on what level they hold it captive, because there are certain battles that we can fight, that we can win, because we kind of don't really have to fight them. We just have to take ourselves and our health and our wealth out of the system and stop supporting it. And then there are some of these bigger battles, longer battles, the battle to end the Federal Reserve and this sort of banking cartel's grip on the world and the money supply and the manipulation of it. That's a much larger battle, but but at the same time, it's still a battle that we have to take one conversation at a time. You're talking about sort of rehashing information that's out there and not wanting to do that in your material, and I have to commend you on that because this is something that is very true of an understanding with me, and it's one of the reasons that I don't read a lot when it comes to philosophy or economics. I have an educated understanding of these things beyond the need to necessarily spend any more academic time on it. And so what I need is something new. I need something different. I need a new way of looking at things. I don't want to hear the same old stuff. And I have this problem with a lot of the economic books that I see coming out recently. It was even one that the Mises Institute was pushing that I thought was just as sort of rehash of economics in one lesson, and maybe it needs to be rehashed. Maybe it needs to be revoiced for a new generation of people and people who maybe think differently or absorb information a little bit differently or through different means. Maybe that's true, but it's certainly not for me. I'm looking for that special touch that you're talking about. That's something different, something more important than just spitting out another piece of work.
Yeah, and another thing that really got to me was whenever I was looking at what's out there, the information, kind of like you. I mean, we're all researchers. We all want to grow on this, and that's why you don't want to keep reading the same things every single day because there's no growth in it.
Yes.
So that was one of the things that I looked at whenever I sat down to outline this book. What new information can I bring? And I not to circle back to the same point, but the one thing that I kept finding that people were confusing about the deep state is they didn't really understand the deep state. It's kind of like economics. A war consists of a lot of battles, and that's what's happening in society right now is we're fighting a whole bunch of battles, and some we're winning, some we're losing, some, whatever. But what we're not realizing is we could win the war. Quit fighting all these battles. We could flat out win the war by understanding economics, because that is the root of every single battle you're fighting is being funded and perpetuated because of economics, because of the Federal Reserve, because of central banking, because of global, the restructuring of global finances. All of these battles that we're fighting, they're fictitious, they're made up for the division so that the economics, which are seen as a transfer of wealth. And I know I'm all over the place because there's so many points in my head right now that I want to make. But what we're seeing is a transfer of wealth globally. That's why you're seeing the destruction of the middle class, and that's why you're seeing a lot of corporations going under, a lot of small businesses going on under, because you're seeing that transfer of wealth. Now, inside the transfer of wealth, you have transfer of resources. And that's another thing that you're seeing. That's why you're seeing all these processing plants burn down. And transfer of power.
Right. That's the other thing, and transfer of power. All of those things. It's a multi-layered, multi-tiered thing. It's the pyramid. It is what I talk about a lot on the show, and that is finding places to direct that energy where it's most, where you're going to be most successful at it. Understanding the enemy and the way that he thinks and the way that he works and the way that he's structured is what what the book does for you.
What I believe is key to all of this is economics. I really do. I believe if everyone, you talked about just now, everyone's trying to figure out where to direct their energy at. There's no better place to direct it in economics. And the reason being is we know that they fund both sides of every war. We know that they're trying to transfer all of our, basically make us dependent on the government. They're trying to do away with our money. The best thing that we could do is understand money, understand the difference in value and worth. I'm finding so many adults don't understand the basics of economics. I'm not talking about all the stuff that you need degrees to understand, like fractional reserve lending and all that. I'm just talking about basic stuff. What is the difference in money versus currency? What's the difference in value versus worth? And so many people don't understand that. So I believe if people, and there's a reason they took economics out of high school, for the same reason that they took civics out of high school. They don't want you to understand your political structure, your political system, or your economic system and your economic structure, because if you do, that's where the change is going to happen.
Well, right, because you can look at it and you can see that it's all propped up, that it's all fake, that there's no...
Well, economics is where you feel the pain the most. You know what I mean? If they passed a bathroom bill, you know, where chicks with dicks can go in bathrooms or whatever, that's not going to affect me. But every single economic policy affects 320 million Americans. That affects everybody. So that's why I'm saying get away from the division, get away from the fictitious fights, and understand what they're doing economically. Because when you do, Henry Ford said it best. If you understood your economics, how economics works, there would be a riot in the streets by morning. There's your solution.
Yeah. Go to towardanarchy.com. Look for the 16th. The links are there. If you find out that there's anything, you hear something in the conversation, you hear something Luke says, you want to know more about Perfect Spiral Capital, you want to know more about the book, you want to get a copy of the book, all of those links are up there. And Luke, it's great to talk to you again, man. It's been a little while, not too long, but you've been busy. You're creating content and you're creating books and putting out good information and really reaching people and kind of touching on some important topics and at the same time having a bit of fun and doing some things that are obviously just meant to entertain maybe as opposed to inform. And I think it's really great, and it's good to get a chance to talk to you again about what you're doing.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. It's good to have my book finished this time when I'm talking to you, so that's a nice thing.
Yeah, no, and it sounds like it's doing really well. I think my dog's killing herself over there. It sounds like it's doing really well. It's showing up really well on Amazon, and the sort of top of its category thing. I don't really know how Amazon works, but obviously if a book is doing well, they're popping it up there, they're promoting it, and hopefully it continues to snowball. What do you think of it? Has it been a really pretty great experience then so far?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, it's been way beyond what I ever expected it could have been. My highest expectations were to sell, a couple of hundred copies or something. If I really, really pushed and marketed and tried to get on podcasts and did everything, anything that came to mind to promote it. And I mean, we've sold about 1,000 copies now. And so, I mean, most books on Amazon sell like 5 copies,
Yeah, right. If any at all. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been phenomenally successful from my point of view. I mean, I'm not a established name that people talk around. I mean, it's not like I'm Dave Ramsey or Robert Kiyosaki or some of these people that everybody knows who that is. It's just me, Yeah. And so it's been great, phenomenal.
That's really cool. Well, I think when people catch on, that was kind of the neat thing about it. You mentioned Robert Kiyosaki. I'm a fan. I've not, I don't follow the guy necessarily, but I did sort of early in his career. I was a producer for a radio show where the host of the show was really big on Kiyosaki, and he would give out his books and meet him and go to these little presentations and stuff. And so I had some experience with him, and he's not bad. I like the Rich Dad Poor Dad thing, the thing that really made him popular. It's this sort of tale of different management techniques in life and economics in this story that he has. He's an interesting one, and it'd be cool to see if you get up there because he did the same thing at some point in his life. He just said, you know what, I have this information, I have this understanding, I put it down here on paper and let people try to buy it and see if they like it and try it, and boy, it worked out real well for him. I hear him say smart economic stuff like I would expect you to say too. It's not even dumb
you have to watch out, especially if you're talking about podcasts. There's 5 million podcasts in the world right now. And so you go searching for something, you find something, financial information, banking information, how to be your own banker, something, anything like that. And you're bound to find all this information that is potentially not good.
It's true.
And, yeah. So you delved into the realm of good, solid information. You put it down on paper. It's to be respected, and I wish you the best on it. I hope it really works out for you. What exactly is the book Between the Lines about? I mentioned literally recovering your sort of financial future from these bankers in Wall Street. That's the subtitle of it, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, so the book is mostly about what is going on out there. It's more problem than it is solution. The solution comes in. I've got a 5-step framework that I put together after a lot of soul searching for kind of, steps that basically anyone can follow to become financially free, become more financially aware, understand these key concepts, and move into the world of, like passive income and things like that. But in order to do that, you have to understand what's going on. And so, I'm a big econ nerd, and of course my gut temptation is to sit there and talk about Austrian economics and business cycle theory and, all of these complicated things that really literally no one cares about. And so for me, there was a lot of, okay, I'm going to go back and delete this chapter. I'm going to, trim some of this out because it's not for everyone. No one's going to read this book if I write a 600-page tome on econ theory. I mean, that's not marketable in any way. And the point of the book is to get it out there. And so really the first big section is the bank is not your friend. Here is what's wrong with banks. Here is what's wrong with the advice that banks give you. Here's the gold standard. Here's the Federal Reserve. Here's all these different components that you need to know. It's not going to drill on it all day. It's not the whole book. It's just like, okay, we need to hit some high points here, and there's things you need to know. And so it'll walk through, like, for example, you take $1,000 and you stick it in the bank. What happens to that $1,000, right? And what happens is shocking to a lot of people because they're going to take $900 that didn't exist and they're going to give it to somebody else based on the $1,000 you put in there, right? And that cycle's going to repeat and repeat. And so all this new money gets created. And so that's a quick look at that. And then we move into Wall Street and what's wrong with that. What do they tell you? Why do they tell you that? What are the actual consequences of following the advice that's given to you? And so it sort of paints this picture that things are really not working out for people that are following the conventional wisdom, and people are ending up following that advice, doing what they're told to do, kind of plugging into the system for 65 years, and then their retirement age, and they're not getting what they were promised, right? So it's bad. It's really bad. I've got clients, in that age.
Well, not only that, but they've been handed, they've left, they've created, they've participated in an economy that has outpaced the growth of even the best of their 401ks and other methods that they've been using over the years to get this. We're dealing with this right now with a 76-year-old father, and dealing with it's okay, it's all right, but it doesn't really keep up. It's not really everything that they said it was going to be. It's not. Luckily, he's a vet, so he has some VA coverage, but not everybody has that.
Yeah, and I've certainly got clients that are on VA disability, and things like that. They're seeing that it's not all going to shake out where they're multimillionaires, living European vacations every single year for the rest of their retirement, right? It's just not reality. And yet that's kind of sort of what's suggested, in some of the literature out there. And so, we get into all that and break it down. And I teach a formula that's really pretty easy to use to kind of show, okay, what's the actual rate of return on something over time? You're taught to look at annual, like averages, so average annual rate of return on say a mutual fund. It's like that doesn't actually mean anything, and it kind of breaks down why, and all of those little nitty gritty things, but in a quick way, right? So it doesn't put anybody to sleep. And then the end of the book, the last kind of third of the book is, okay, given that we've explored all these problems and given that the advice that you've been told is wrong, because it is, and I prove that, then what do you do? And so we have a 5-step framework. It's called the Truth Blueprint. It's take responsibility, reclaim your money, undo your debts, transcend your expenses, and help others. And so, it's a logical progression, that's important to do in that order. But step one, is take responsibility. You need to learn this stuff. You need to understand why these things aren't working so that you know not to fall into the same trap when some other, charlatan walks into your life and tells you they're going to make you all this money, right? Like I'm not trying to walk in and tell you to do X because I'm going to get paid, right? I want you to do X because it's the right move. Whether you work with me or not, or whether you work with my team or not, it kind of doesn't matter to me. If you like me, great. If you don't like me, find somebody else. There's a handful of people out there that can do this, right? And it's just important to vet people and to make sure that you're operating in a framework of trust. Because if you go into Edward Jones or, Charles Schwab or some of these places, like they're going to give you the same cookie cutter stock market advice, and it's going to be the same kind of training program, regardless of which company you're talking to.
Certainly for the average investor, and that's what we're talking about, the average person, let's say, who's interested in dealing with managing their funds, hopefully for the future, managing their wealth, not just their money.
Right. And that's a whole different conversation, right? Like I think people should invest.
Oh,
but I think that they should get their head on straight first. Because if you're following kind of what's told to you, it's like, oh, just give me your money and I'll take care of it. And you think, okay, cool. And you're real happy when the stock market, when the market is up, and you're real unhappy when the market is down. And then you switch financial advisors and end up in the same boat again the next time the market's down. And it's like, okay, you're burning up 10, 15, 30 years of the time that you're supposed to be building, right? And so our whole system is that you should always be moving in the same direction, and that direction is up, right? And that's kind of our whole the whole thing, right? Is that you shouldn't be selling principal, right? If you've got an investment, if you're making an investment, okay, cool, take some gains when you make gains, but don't carve out the core of what you started with, and you should always be going up. You shouldn't be like, well, the stock market's down, I guess I can't retire for another 5 years while I wait for the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ to get back up to where they were. And that's brutal. And I used to work with a lot of people that had to come back into the workforce, when I was in the retail world. And like, that's not good. That's not good at all. You don't want to be in that situation.
Who's joining us now, Bennett Hunter, the Canadian Libertarian, at Canadian Libertarian on Rumble and at Canadian Libertarian channel on YouTube. Check out his show. And if you like what you hear, our conversation, there's more of it to be found on him.
Do that, but a lot of them they want to play the game. Well, I can change things from within. Now, early on, I used to kind of have some disagreements with those people and say that seems like a Herculean waste of time and resources. But I'm also, because I understand the beauty of the market, which is freedom in general, and the freedom of all this innovation and ideas and diverging ways of doing things is, whichever. If it takes a multiple-pronged approach, right, I'll do my things from outside of the system. And if there are people that want to, try to enter into the fray and try to change things from within, by all means, have a try at it. Do whatever you can. Anything that, like I say, anything possible that can help in some way. Now, Elon, I'll even acknowledge, obviously that guy, to get to where he's at today, he had to play ball with a lot of governments. There's no mistaking about it. But there's been you can actually see some positive benefits of that, even though I would say, of course, he had to sell out any principles along the way. But that's that moral quandary and dilemma I think we all are susceptible to. What do you do? Because the moral person, the ethical person, the person that wants to do only the right thing, once again, it sounds good in theory, but under this current system, you're basically, you might as well be handing yourself a gun and shooting yourself in the foot, proverbially, for all of eternity, because you're the ones that's usually going to lose out in that endeavor. Now, in the long term, of course, there's always that potential. But I can see the reasoning and the logic behind some people who are saying, well, you got to get in there and start changing things from within. Now, at the top of the political level, I don't know if that would be any good. But especially for people that want to enter into the business realm or, get on school boards or some of these things, I think those are great initiatives, because I do see where a lot of the people who just kind of went about life, the live, let live type of people, have gravitated away from these institutions, right?
Right. They've come away from them. And what you're getting at right there is something that I talk about a lot too, even though it's an anarchist perspective. I know that I'm talking to people that are participating in the system and need good information and good ideas about how they're going to participate and navigate in it. And one of the things that I suggest is that the power of your vote greatly increases the closer it is to your home.
Yeah.
Oh, it means more in your backyard, in your community, to participate and get involved and to speak up and say something and do something in your community than it ever will on the sort of the grand stage of the circus that's coming up. We only have 7 more months or something like that for our little circus down here.
Yeah, that's going to be quite the spectacle to behold for sure. But just to let you know, actually, before we continue on, because I know a lot of people aren't maybe even some of your audience, because there are kind of two types of libertarians, and you're probably familiar with this stuff. Now, early on, like I say, in 2008, 2012, watching the whole Ron Paul thing, you're learning about these things, and it takes you a little while to put all these principles together, put all the information and sort it out in your mind, right? So I went from the typical minarchist, taking the minarchist position, which, once again, not a hater on the minarchists, whether you're a new person to understand these principles or the philosophy of liberty. I'm not going to hate on anyone, but I am one of those people that at some point in time, I mean, if you're intellectually or ethically honest, you can't even make a case for a minarchist state, right? Because then you're still advocating for the use of violence as a means to an end. So I can't get behind that. So really, I'm a libertarian. But I call myself a philosophical libertarian, not a political libertarian, because there is a difference. And once again, had some disagreements. Even today, I still have the odd disagreement with the political libertarians. I still nowadays, I've trained my mind to think of them as not people that are status light per se, but people that are themselves probably on that intellectual journey. And I'm more than willing to keep walking along with them. They might not get to the final exit where I'm at, maybe not. But I'm more than willing to continue on that journey, because I know they're at least the kind of people who are willing to leave me the hell alone. Right? So,
Sometimes I feel like I don't have a partner. Sometimes I feel like my only friend is the city I live in, the city of angels. Lonely as I am, together